Everyone, I'm very excited to demonstrate the watercolor techniques that we talked about in class today. All right, so to get started, we want a small brush and a medium brush, preferably flat tipped. What I'm going to do is, into the colors that I know I'm going to use, I'm going to put a drop of water into those colors just so it gets the paint nice and activated, nice and juicy. Juicy is the key word for this unit. All right, so first let's start off with our wash. Our wash gives an even and flat effect. So when we use our brush, you want to just kind of like pet the paint, and when you want to go in even strokes. So if you need to go and get more paint, that is fine. You will see streaks in the beginning, but when it dries, it will dry into one flat area. If you need to go over again to make the streaks more go away, that is just fine, but a wash is an even and flat effect. All right, now for our wet and wet. Our wet and wet is just like the title sounds, so it's wet paint onto wet paper. So I'm going to wet my paper in my section, and then I'm going to take my already wet paint, that's why we put the drops of water in, and I'm going to use analogous colors because those look the best next to each other. And now I'm going to start to put kind of dots around it. If you notice that the dots aren't spreading, that's because there's not enough water, so I need a little bit more water in that area. And you kind of watch them kind of bleed into one another. We don't want to like swirl in the wet and wet. You just want to let the wet and wet happen by itself. There we go. There's our soft and fuzzy and tie-dye effect for wet and wet. All right, for the dry brush. The dry brush is good for small details, or if you're using it for like little precise things, that's what it's good for too. So it's basically using not a lot of water, but a lot of paint. So for example, so I have my purple here. I just have the water that I added. And so you can kind of get kind of like feathery textures to it. I'm just kind of making like kind of like firework kind of things to it. Or you can use a little more water and you can use the tip of your brush and you can get those very precise lines. So it's basically like drawing with the brush. So you can make your designs on there how you want to. All right, the next one of my favorite ones, is a resist. So for the resist, really any color works, but I like it better when you use light waxy crayons or oil pastels, and then dark watercolors really look pretty awesome. So I'm gonna draw. You want to press pretty hard, not so hard that you break your crayon. If it happens on accident, that's okay. But I'm just gonna make my resist design. I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen, but that's okay. You'll be able to see it in a little bit, hopefully. Hopefully, if I do everything right. And then for this one, you're gonna want your flat tipped brush, and I'm gonna pet my paint. It's kind of like a wash when you put it on. The resist can be a little futzy, can be a little like sassy when it comes to putting it on. So I'm gonna go in my horizontal strokes, and that wax is pushing the paint off of itself, and it keeps it from touching the paper underneath. I get my little moon top right there. And so that's a resist. So the sponge gives a textured effect. When you're using it, you can use the rough side for a more textured effect, or you can use the soft side for kind of like little stamps, and I'll kind of show you. Whenever you use the sponge, I don't want you to dip it in the watercolors like that. I want you to paint on the sponge itself. So I'm going to paint right on there. I'm going to use analogous colors again. That's just, I'm using analogous colors. That's because they look the best right next to each other because they're color neighbors. And so it's not going to create a color I don't want when I'm using it. So I'm using the soft side right now. And I'm going to press, 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 press. And as it releases more water, you get a more textured effect. All right, now for the rubbing alcohol, aka hand sanitizer. So the key to this one, and actually for a lot of them, for the rest of them, is juicy. We need this to be juicy. So we're gonna make the color we want to use very, very juicy, or colors that you want to use. And I'm actually gonna flip it over to this side because I know I'm gonna be dropping a lot of paint. So I'm just gonna get my section very, very wet. And then while it's still wet, keyword, while it's still wet, I'm going to put my hand sanitizer on. And it's happening a little bit. It's already starting to kind of lift the color off, but I'll be able to see more of that color lift off once it dries. All right, now for the plastic wrap, same thing. You want it to be like ultra juicy, because when it is ultra juicy, that's what's gonna get in the little creases of the plastic wrap. So I'm gonna get, using my flat tip brush again, get it very, very juicy. Do not want it to be, I don't know, maybe I'll add a little purple just to jazz it up a little bit. Very good. And then while it's still wet, kind of have to hurry, you're going to put your plastic wrap over it, and you're going to kind of crease it and kind of crinkle it, because that's what's going to give you the design, is those little creases. If you don't have those little creases, a design is not going to come out. So I'm just going to bunch that up, and that needs to dry on there. So I'm going to leave that on there. All right, and then salt, again, salt, juicy, very juicy. Let's see. I'm going to do blue and green for this one. And so the salt sucks the paint, or well, I guess I chose purple. Oh well. It sucks the water out of the paint, leaving like nice little dots. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to gently sprinkle it, and then when that dries, hopefully we'll see a little salt design. All right, thanks for watching.